Good morning, my neighbor. How are you doing? Are you feeling okay? Good morning, my neighbor. How are you doing? Are you feeling okay?
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Africa for Dummies, hosted as always by me, Nathan, and Zenge.
Hello, everybody.
Now, everybody wants to get rich, and Africans are taking their chances by gambling. Today, we're having an interesting topic and having a discussion with a researcher who's done a lot of research on gambling patterns and problem gambling among youth in sub-Saharan Africa. He's also a lecturer in global health at the University of Manchester. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bitanihirwe.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction.
This was a thoroughly interesting article, and no one really talks about gambling in Africa. It's normally not considered one of the big issues, and the way you extend it to mental health also opens a new breadth of understanding on the issue. So we just want to ask basically, why did you feel like you needed to write this article, and what really sparks your interest in gambling and the link to mental health issues in Africa?
No, really, thank you. That's a fantastic question. So my interest in relation to gambling on the continent really stems from what really is this increasing level of evidence really pointing towards young Africans drawn towards gambling. But the reality is they're not really knowledgeable or don't really understand about the serious impact of gambling addiction, not just on themselves, but also in terms of its effects on society and the community. And one of the things that I've been noticing as an individual from Uganda is there's been this increasing number of illegal and legal gambling establishments that have been surfacing, not just in Uganda, but on the continent. And also this aspect of a lot of stories that are being put forward in relation to aspects of crime, mental health, but also suicide. That I think really played a key role in bringing the importance of gambling among youth to the fore, specifically in terms of social media.
I think there was a very interesting. You actually mentioned this documentary that I saw by BBC Africa where they talked about gambling, and they also did one on suicide rates as well.
There's a documentary in Kenya and how money and the shortage of money and that whole issue of trying to keep up with the Jonases, and it's just causing a whole mental spiral, especially among African men.
No, definitely. For the interested listener, I think the two documentaries you're referring to is Gamblers Like Me by Zoe Flood.
Yeah.
And there's another one that focuses on Kenya, and then that's really called Gambling at Sure Bet. So definitely two fantastic documentaries that can be streamed on BBC.
Yeah, I'll definitely put a link to those in the description.
You said that in your article, and I'm just going to quote from your article. You said in Kenya, Uganda, South Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, and Tanzania, was found that 54% of youths in the sub-Saharan African region have engaged in some form of gambling activity. So now, what exactly then do we define as gambling? Because, it could go from, lotto or poker or
a coin flip.
Yeah, a coin flip. How do we define gambling, and why do you think this is such a big attraction to such a large population of African youth?
In terms of that figure of 54%, from what I recall, it stems from a survey of, I think it was 3,900 individuals. These are millennials aged between 17 and 35 from those countries that you mentioned. Yeah, so the reality about gambling, it takes all shapes and forms in different cultures and different contexts on the continent. Sports betting, casinos, playing cards, playing dice. But when we think about an actual definition of gambling, I like to think of gambling or betting, any activity which involves the wagering of money or any item of monetary value. So that could be clothes, CDs, shoes, in relation to an outcome that is completely governed by chance. So literally it's just, wagering some money, based on luck. Hopefully you win or you lose. As to why, that's a very important question. So I'm thinking the reason. So one of the reasons that comes to mind why people, young individuals on the continent, might be drawn to gambling, is really more to do with aspects of unemployment and insecurity about futures. So we also understand, that these men keeping up with the Joneses. It's really this element of really, how am I going to, to support myself and my family, but also, for instance, it could also be an aspect of putting myself through university. So how am I going to be able to gain that money?
Yeah.
Another thing that's an issue when we think about this aspect of what draws people to gambling is just like the very clever marketing and advertising that we see taking place, not just in Africa, but around the world. So and of course we talk about aspects of technology, some mobile technology, so more people, there's more penetrance in relation to people really having more access to means to gamble. And then of course it tends to be a lot more of these youth who have this concept of really always being on their phones, so they have more access and more time to gamble. So I think those are some of the key elements that really draw people to gamble.
Yeah. So would you then say that technology and the massive increase in mobile phone owners in Africa in the past 20 years, I think more mobile phones than most continents now, it has sort of made it easier for people to access gambling in different levels due to more innovative advertising?
Definitely. As I said, it's just what element of penetrance. So more people have access to these gadgets. And I think it's really that element of regulation. So really, how do you block a 10 or 12-year-old individual who's got a smartphone from accessing, some kind of some gambling website? And these are the things that we really need to focus on. And it's really becoming a more challenging issue. That's being raised around the world that I think is extremely important.
Yeah, certainly. And that actually goes well into our next question, which is could you describe how bad the situation is and how it's affecting different societies across the continent's youth?
So when I think about this question, specifically in the context of Africa, I definitely see it as a growing public health concern. As you touched on that Geopol survey, where I talk about the 54% average of individuals of youth, engaging in some aspect of gambling. I think, one of the key issues that we really do see is that despite these high levels, I think it was reported in that survey that even up to as many as 76% of young Kenyans had been shown to engage in some form of gambling.
76%.
I think 76%. So it's pretty high. But I think, and the sad thing is, these figures, they're numbers, but the reality is we're still trying to understand why people really decide to gamble, despite the growing awareness of its drawbacks, as I mentioned before, crime and mental health problems. And I think one of the reasons for this growth in gambling across Africa is, as I said, really this problem with regulation. In terms of really, are there like any systems out there that really offer protection to vulnerable individuals and gambling harm? And as such, because of this lack of regulation, there are more opportunities to engage in gambling, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we think about Africa being a continent where I think it's estimated like around 60% of individuals are aged under 25, and then there's this very high level of unemployment. Of course, I wouldn't say of course, but the reality is people are going to be looking for ways to support themselves, and gambling becomes a very real possibility.
Hey everybody, time for a quick break. We actually got the opportunity to interview a Ugandan youth who takes part in gambling, and got to ask him some few questions about how he got started, what are some drawbacks that he's faced when he was gambling, and why he keeps getting back into it. And just before you hear this interview, just to give you a little bit of information, all financial information you hear are in Ugandan shillings. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the interview. What motivated you to get into betting?
Man, What motivated me to get into betting was I saw some guy win 1 million shillings when he betted 100 shillings. So I was like, if people can do it, why can't I do it? So I started betting to try and get richer.
And what benefits or setbacks have you seen since you started gambling?
Benefits or setbacks that I have had since I started betting and gambling. Benefits is you win money. That's like the main issue of betting. But setbacks are the losses are more. It's like how they say betting isn't for the poor, because once you bet with very little money, you always stake very many teams. That leads to losses. There's a high probability of losing 30 games. You can't win 30 games.
Yeah, definitely. And have you experienced any heavy losses? And if so, what made you get back into the game?
Yes, I've experienced a heavy loss of 400,000. 400,000 was from one game. I staked on one game 400,000, and I'd staked 0-0 halftime. But on the 45th minute, it was 1-0. So that 400k was gone. It's because one of the reasons to get back into the game is to get back the money you have lost. You need to win more than the money you have lost. And to get back, what other thing that motivated me is you need to get rich. So you just keep on trying till the lucky day.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that interview. And now back to the show. Yeah, no, I was going to say, it's interesting because I spoke to a friend of mine who mentioned that they lose approximately. There was one period in their life where they lost about 1,000 euros in 1 month just
Wow.
from betting, you know. And I was just like at what point, do you realize like, okay, this is, and and the crazy thing is it's still gambling at this time, so I wanted to find out what are some factors that promote gambling addiction in Africa, this even despite those heavy losses.
I wouldn't say just Africa. I mean, it's
Mhm.
I think when we talk about risk factors for gambling, I would say they're pretty much universal. I think some of the factors known to drive gambling behavior, when we think about these factors, it's important to really understand the relationship and recognize the connection between the individual themselves and then the environment in which they live in. So we can talk about family members, so really being exposed to gambling behavior. So there's
Mhm.
evidence suggesting that going to maybe a gambling venue at a young age with your parents and seeing them gamble might serve as one of those factors that really lays the roots for an individual becoming predisposed to that behavior. And yeah, I mean, we talk about elements of peer influence. So
Mhm.
your friends and your colleagues, for them it might be a regular event. So it's seen as a regular kind of behavior. And unfortunately for some people, it might spiral out of control and become a pathological habit. And of course, aspects of substance abuse that are being linked
Mhm.
towards this relation, once again, mental health, substance abuse, so drinking
Mhm.
and people tending to have that as a trigger for gambling. And I think another important one to keep in mind is really accessibility to venues. So
Mhm.
one of the things that we, as I mentioned at the beginning, is really this increase of gambling establishments, close to schools or could be close to universities. So unfortunately, you find yourself really being attracted to these venues, and without having that regulation in place, these are factors that might trigger an individual to become more prone to gambling behaviors?
Yeah, I think I don't know if it's just me, but I've seen like a boom in, especially these sports betting
Yeah, sports betting.
institution. Like I don't know if it's just me, but like in the last 5 years, like like on every corner, on
Yeah.
almost every TV ad is talking about some form of sports betting.
Yeah, and
And
before I think it used to be one company, and this was in Zambia, one company, but now there's so many different companies competing.
Mm.
They're also sponsoring. They have so much money now that they're sponsoring major football teams, and it's a part of, like, it's a household thing now. It's not just a niche anymore.
Brings to the fore this really important aspect of really emphasizing, the importance of increasing knowledge,
mm,
about gambling and the negative effects that it can have, through teaching and education, as a means to prevent, the youth, really getting or developing those bad habits that really push them towards, pathological levels of gambling.
yeah, that's actually a perfect segue into the next question, which is, there was this really interesting part in your paper where you talk about this relationship between problem or gambling addiction or problem gambling and risky behavior. Could you just elaborate a little bit on that relationship?
No, no, definitely.
Mhm.
And that's a very nice segue. Thank you. So,
Yeah.
so when you think about risky behavior or decision making, they tend to go hand in hand with gambling behavior because, this risky behavior is really more an aspect of impulsive or a sensation seeking behavior.
Okay.
And there has been a lot of work. Once again, this stems from Western nations really showing that individuals with this high sensation-seeking personalities tend to experience gambling problems. And in the same way, so young people who often exhibit a tendency towards behavioral disinhibition, so impulsive tendencies,
Mhm.
have been shown to engage in risky behavior, such as sex, risky sexual tendencies. And just to put this into a little bit more context, there was a study that came from Uganda from I think it was 2 years ago, where the two researchers really looked at they assessed sexual risk associated behavior in terms of gambling amongst individuals between 15 and 24. And what these individuals found was that individuals who gambled more than individuals who didn't gamble had more regular sexual encounters. They tend to have an earlier age of sexual debut. They tended to more often engage in unprotected sex and have sex with individuals of whom they didn't know the HIV status. So it can be pretty scary from that perspective because when you think about this element of risky behavior and how it goes with gambling and mixing it with alcohol, it can become a bit of a problem. And that's why we think about it as a public health concern.
Basically, what you're saying is that gambling causes this sort of mentality where you have high sensation seeking or instant gratification, and you sort of have an appetite for risk, and that sort of has ripple effects on other things, including your sexual activity and
I would say it's associated. I'm not going to say directly linked.
Yeah.
But
right.
We need to make sure that's completely clear.
Yeah.
Is that tendency towards that behavior that really spurs one on to behave in a certain way.
You also talk about basically you talk about the response. I think you mentioned earlier regulation, and you talked about how people are dealing with it. I've heard about you talking about regulation and the lack of regulation. I don't understand necessarily whether governments are aware of the issue or it's something that they've just not prioritized. And I haven't heard much about civil society. Could you just let us know exactly how different actors are being involved in this issue from government, civil society? Just shed more light on that, if you don't mind.
The governments are definitely very aware of the problems. But I'd like to think that based on my readings and really engaging with individuals in the sphere, that the African governments are definitely taking a proactive stance.
Proactive stance, okay.
Yeah, so for instance, when you think about Kenya, the government has really imposed some really hefty taxes in relation to the gaming revenue. I'm not too sure about the percentages, but they were high enough that the actual companies were complaining. That you need to reduce these taxes, otherwise we're gonna pull the system. But so which obviously shows that it is an important aspect, and governments are doing something proactively. But other responses have involved outlawing outdoor and social media advertising on sports betting. Another aspect that comes to mind, I think this is also within the Kenyan context, is they've really been trying to ban TV advertisements for sports betting for sports betting firms anyway, between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m., as well as looking to prevent or to prohibit celebrities endorsing gambling, because I think that has the negative.
Yeah, that's actually interesting, because now there's the ethical argument on whether or not gambling is bad. So should the government treat gambling as simply a criminal thing, or something sort of like the way you treat alcohol, or should the government treat gambling as symptoms of greater poverty and inequality? So how would you think that? How would you suggest this should be approached, both on the government and civil society level? Like, what do you think Kenya is on the right path, or do you think there are other better ways of dealing with it?
I mean, Kenya is definitely on the right path. I mean, it's you need to hit people where it hurts. Obviously, that's money most of the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, just to bring your question into some kind of clinical kind of context, gambling is actually classified as a condition. So I definitely feel that it should be seen alongside substance abuse disorders such as alcohol abuse and substance abuse, that people should get that same element of treatment and understanding. I don't know how far we are as a continent, but I am aware that I think it's in Kenya. There's been a strong push. They did establish an organization called the Gaming Awareness Society of Kenya, which really focuses on awareness, education, advocacy, really just to help people who are dealing with gambling addiction, just so people are aware of the problems associated with it. But yeah, I mean, it's really just about being able to have enough specialists who understand that addiction takes different forms. Like I said, it can be drug abuse, substance abuse, but it's just as similar to addiction.
So so this seems to be crossing over from dealing with it as regulation and encouraging responsible gambling, if you like, to also a mental health issue, to also, and this is an interest of mine, to whether or not it's a symptom of poverty, because I think you mentioned that the gambling industry has increased, has got quite a lot of people employed, and obviously people do get money from it, but obviously it's a toxic cycle. So it's sort of like a multidisciplinary thing that you have to approach, don't you think?
No, of course, completely. But I mean, how do you eradicate poverty?
Right. Yeah. True. That's another. that's a big one too.
We talk about that element of a lot of young people, such as yourselves. Some people on the continent who, unfortunately, I mean, they go to university and looking for work, and they can't find work. And as I said before, we're seeing with this mushrooming of gambling establishments, and this incorrect ideology that by me gambling, it's going to help solve the situation, when in fact we can drive you into further problems. It's I mean, it's a very complex and a multifaceted issue. That unfortunately we need to try address. But I think the steps are gradually being put into place, and I do commend the African governments for what they're doing. But it's going to take a lot more than just government input.
That's actually quite interesting, because it sounds like it sounds like it's going. This gambling situation is kind of heading in the same direction that cigarettes. For example, in
Yeah.
Europe, you see that they're putting like these scary pictures on cigarette packages, for example.
Mhm.
Trying to deter people from, because I think the government has realized that it's quite a huge cost to them, but it kind of sounds like it's headed in that direction. Why do you think African youth should care about this, and how do you think we can be a part of the solution?
No, really another fantastic question. So
Mhm.
I definitely feel that it's important for the African youth, first of all, to understand that, I mean, gambling, it can be fun. It's recreational,
Hmm.
but to also understand that it can have devastating effects, not just on the individuals that gamble, but on their families and communities. Yeah.
Mhm.
So beyond the financial and personal ramifications, gambling has been linked, as I said before, to mental health problems, aspects of depression, substance abuse, suicidal thoughts. But it's also been linked, when you think about, family, um, conflicts within families, breakdowns in relationships and friendships. It also impairs, your educational impairment. So, for instance, I mean, young children who take their school fees money and spend it on gambling,
Hmm.
it affects them from that perspective. And also, like, thinking about your employment prospects based on criminal records. So
Right.
these are things that one needs to keep in mind. But when I think about how youth can move ahead with this, I'm really thinking more in terms of the youth being more proactive in terms of advocating for programs and services, to assist people and families affected by problem gambling. Really just letting them know that this is a really big issue, but also encouraging other activities and really being able to, as I said
Yeah.
before, people can gamble responsibly, but I mean, not taking it to that extreme. And really, this is as a last point. I'm thinking more in terms of really how youth can come together and really just, you know, thinking about, ways to develop support communities,
Mhm.
because I mean, I think it really begins with education. As I
Yeah.
said before, we can gamble responsibly, but when you see it starting to evolve out of control, who can I speak to, and then you get that information about the dangers that,
Yeah.
that might be involved in problem gambling, and really having that support system in place to help people struggling with the addiction.
Right. So and just as you just said, who can I speak to? So for any of our listeners that are listening right now, do you know of any organizations or civil society that people could simply get into touch with, or just get more info on the mental health effects on gambling? If you have any recommendations.
Um, I mean, the one that I mentioned that I'm more familiar with,
Right.
once again, is really more in relation to in Kenya. So this is the Gaming Awareness Society of Kenya. But these are you tend to often have like gambling awareness organizations in countries. I think it might just be a matter of Googling,
Mhm.
gambling awareness, be it in Namibia, be it in Uganda, be it in South Africa, and from there that there might be um, potential ways to get that kind of information. But I mean, I think the reality is we don't have enough of these support systems in place, truth
Yeah.
speaking, in Africa, because not a lot of investment really goes into to gambling as a significant public health concern. But I mean, we're on the right trajectory. It's raising the eyebrows. So I think it's important people understand that. It's just maybe being more proactive about it and hopefully getting more people to push to see how things can evolve from that perspective.
Yeah, certainly. I think that's a good way to end the show, I guess. And on behalf of all of our fans and everyone, I'd just like to say thank you very much, Mr. Bintanirwe, for taking some time off to join us here
Yeah.
and further explain. I think something that's not been given enough attention too, and is a growing issue, especially on the African continent, as well as in other areas as well. So just like to say thank you very much for taking the time out to join us.
No, really, thank you so much for letting me be part of this fantastic platform.